Hi.
Hello.
Nice to see you.
Nice to see you too.
Thanks for coming in today. We're very excited. Now, this is your opportunity, everybody, to ask questions of Stuart. This is a fireside chat. It's not with me, it's with you folks. There is a microphone going round, and and I love that you, sir, you are my new best friend because you've already got your hand up, so you are getting the first go on the mic. What I will say to all those who want to ask a question, please make sure you hold the mic up close, otherwise we won't be able to hear you, and let's try and get to the question fast, because I do not want to learn your life story, as gorgeous as you are as human beings. Stuart, before we start, I'd love to ask first a more general question, which is the theme of the festival. How do we get the next 10 years right? And go.
Got it. Okay. This reminds me of the Monty Python Blue Peter sketch, if you remember that one. Probably before some people's time here, but you can find it on YouTube.
It's a good one.
It's a good one. Well, Jan.
Yeah, exactly.
So by 10 years, I think we have to assume that's referring to the timescale on which many people expect to see general purpose AI or AGI or superhuman AI or whatever you want to call it, AI systems that exceed human capabilities in every relevant dimension. I personally think it's a bit longer than 10 years, but I know people who think it's 5 or even less than 5. And one thing I would say is it's not here now, right? Despite what you might read in some of the more breathless media articles, large language models are not general purpose AI, although they sometimes do a pretty good job of pretending to be general purpose AI. So there's definitely something going on there. We just don't know what it is, and we don't really know how to use it as a component in creating really intelligent systems. So my view is, if you look at the amount of money going into creating AGI, by some estimates, it's 10 billion pounds a month.
A month?
So
as little as that?
As little as that. So that, put in context, that's about the same size as the entire United States budget for all science and technology research.
For an entire year?
For an entire year.
Or forever?
Yeah, so the National Science Foundation, for example, is about 10 billion pounds a year, right? And that covers all basic research in all the sciences other than medical sciences. So just to give you a sense of scale, the amount going into making sure that the AGI systems we produce are actually going to be safe is negligible.
Wow.
It may not even be in $1 million a month. And so we face a situation where we're running at full speed towards a cliff.
That makes me feel really safe.
And we hope that by the time we get to the cliff, someone else has invented a parachute that makes sure that we can jump off this cliff and everything will be okay. And if we haven't invented the parachute, we're just going to head straight off that cliff. So this is not a good situation to be in. And, so what do we do about it, right?
This cliff,
Yeah.
How likely is it that someone else, we're relying on someone else, how likely is it that they will have invented a parachute? And what does that parachute even look like?
So the parachute looks like a way of designing AI systems so that we have mathematical guarantees that they're going to behave in ways that are helpful to humanity. And that's not an easy thing to do. Theoretically, we understand how to do that. But as I say, the difference in investment is, 8 orders of magnitude or something. So what we have to do to get the next 10 years right is to redirect a large fraction of the research that's going into capability development into safety, right? Into making sure that the thing does not take humanity off the cliff without the parachute, right? So imagine that if instead of talking about AI, we're talking about nuclear energy or airplanes. Right now, it's like we're investing in the engines, right? We're developing more and more and more powerful engines, but we haven't figured out how to make sure that the engine stays on the wings of the airplane.
Wow.
And if we hadn't done that, you would think, well, shouldn't we invest in the part of the field that makes sure that the engines stay on the wings and don't fall off?
And so why aren't more people interested in that? Is it simply to do with funding?
I think it's funding. It's a misconception about what counts as AI, right? So to make progress in AI right now means beating benchmarks. So there are benchmarks for computer vision, for speech recognition, all kinds of benchmarks for large language models. And progress means beating the benchmark, right? Getting a higher score. And that has nothing to do with whether the system you're building is actually safe and predictable and does a good job, right? It's completely the opposite in nuclear energy. Almost all the research in nuclear energy goes into containment. How do you make sure that the nuclear reaction does not get out of control? That's what nuclear engineering is all about. And we have to have a total change in mindset. So how do we achieve that change in mindset? What I think is we need red lines laid down by the government that say, if your system crosses this red line, it will immediately be removed from the market, and maybe we'll fine you 10% of your global revenues, which is a typical thing that the European Union likes to do to tech companies. So that would then create a huge incentive for the companies to actually understand how their systems work and actually be able to predict what they're going to do and what they're going to not do and design them so that they don't do what they're not allowed to do.
So how can we trust governments to make those right decisions? And also, surely we need to have a united front in terms of these ordinances which will be created by governments. How does that even come into being?
So, actually, it comes into being through things like the summit that's happening on the 1st of November, that the UK is convening and inviting heads of state from around the world.
So people are working on it.
So people are working on it. And, people always say, well, what about China? Right? But China actually has already legislated the red lines. So if you run a large language model in China and your large language model hallucinates false information, it is removed from the market. So they already have those red lines out there.
Who doesn't have any lines?
Right now, the US has no lines whatsoever.
None at all.
The UK has no lines whatsoever.
Oh.
Europe is working on its lines.
We can turn this into a pantomime and people can hiss and boo if they like.
Boo and hiss. So the UK is working on it. They have the AI Act that they've been writing now for about 3 years.
Okay.
And that should be finalized later on this year, and it goes into force in 2025. That doesn't really have red lines. In the sense that a system that violates the red line is removed from the market. I think that's absolutely crucial because that puts a kind of existential risk on the company. It says, look, if you violate this red line, your company is at risk. And that's the right way to create the incentive, I think.
I'm going to worry about the lack of lines while we have a show of hands who'd like to ask a question. This wonderful gentleman here with the beard. What's your name? Where'd you come from? And your question, please.
This is working. I'm Luke. I'm from Australia. Thank you for letting me ask a question. So I'm curious, with these summits happening of world leaders, do you think that they really get the scale of the risk? And do you think that they're worried about the most important risks that can come from AI?
So the question is, do these governments actually get it, right? Are they aware? And I think they are starting to get it, right? I had several years ago, I think in around 2015, I started using a slide in my talks where there's an email from the alien civilization.
What did it say?
It said, "Be warned, we will arrive in 30 to 50 years' time." It's addressed to...
How nice that they sent it.
It was, yeah. So they addressed it to humanity@un.org. And then, so humanity@un.org says, "Humanity is currently out of the office. We will respond to your message when we return." Smiley face. And that was, I think, that was the view for most of the last 10 years. And then they came back to the office in March of this year. They came back to the office and they read the emails from the aliens. So I think, to give them their credit, governments are now responding with some degree of real concern and acknowledging, I mean, they can't really not acknowledge it, right? You've got all the leading academics in the field, or almost all the leading academics. You've got the CEOs of all the leading companies saying that if we achieve AGI, that's an existential risk or risk of extinction at the same level as nuclear war or a global pandemic, right? They can't really pretend that that message is not there. So I think they're taking it seriously. The problem is they don't know what to do about it, right? And it's, you know, nuclear war, it took us decades to figure out what to do.
With lots of mistakes made along the way.
Lots of mistakes. We nearly killed ourselves several times, and we were very lucky not to be extinct by now. And we can't afford to take 30 or 40 years, and we can't afford any mistakes at that level. So this is why I think eventually what we have to have is a rule that says, here are the designs for AI systems that we can prove are safe. And these are the only designs that you're allowed to use. Until then, right, I think the red lines are the right answer. Here are some behaviors. All right, here's an example, right? If a system is able to replicate itself, i.e. make another copy of itself on another machine, right, that would be an unallowable behavior. If a system breaks into somebody else's computer, that would be an unallowable behavior, right? So you make a list of those unallowable behaviors. The companies have to develop technology that guarantees that those unallowable behaviors cannot happen under any circumstances. And by developing that technological capability, then I think we're in a much better position to ensure that AI systems are safe going forward.
Thank you for your question, sir. Really good question. We have a woman here in a very stripy shirt. What's your name and where'd you come from, and what's your question?
Hello, I'm Elizabeth and I'm French. Do you think that in addition to the regulations and what we could suggest these companies do, the individuals, the practitioners, should also perhaps have an oath, have a set of, I would say, duties such as doctors, physicians have, or other chartered professions? Because ultimately very few individuals have a very large power in their hands, even within these companies.
Yeah, so that's a great question. Should we train and license practitioners in this area? And I think the answer is yes. And in fact, in the United States Senate yesterday, a day before yesterday, they introduced the outline of a new bill, and that includes licensing and training requirements for practitioners. So I think that's really important, and medicine is a good example. And what happens with these codes of conduct and this kind of training requirements, it's not that the person gets up in the morning and says, okay, here's what I'm going to do. Oh, but I can't do that because the rules said I'm not allowed to do that. Right? When a doctor gets up in the morning, they just say, how am I going to be a good doctor today? Right? Which means, how am I going to, cure my patients? And so it changes the mindset of the practitioner, what they think of as being a good doctor, what they think of as being a good nuclear engineer, and what they think of as being a good AI practitioner. Up to now, we've had basically no ethical training for computer scientists at all. There's no professional requirement, as there is for civil engineers, mechanical engineers. They have to be chartered, they have to actually pass a whole series of exams, and they have to have all that kind of training. And that doesn't exist for computer scientists, but I believe it needs to. So that's a really important part of the puzzle.
That's a really fascinating question. Thank you for that. In your book, Human Compatible, available at all good bookshops, you discuss aligning AI systems with human values. Could you elaborate on that, on the key challenges and the potential solutions for achieving value-aligned AI?
Good question.
Thanks.
Kerrie.
It's one I prepared earlier.
Good question. Okay, so here's the basic problem that we face, right? Which is that the way we've been designing AI systems from the beginning is we create objective achieving machinery, and then we specify an objective. So, for example, your GPS, you specify a destination, the GPS figures out how to get to the destination. And that sounds like perfectly fine, what else could you do? But when we have powerful AI systems, what is the objective that we should give them? It's make the future the way we would like it to be, right? Which is an extremely underspecified objective, right? It's not like, get me to Tooting Bec Station, right? It's much broader, much vaguer than that. And so an AI system has to be designed so that it knows that it doesn't know what that objective really means. It does not know, so if I give it two possible futures and say, well, which one meets that objective better, actually the AI system has to acknowledge that it doesn't know the answer to that question in all cases. And when you build AI systems that way, apparently I'm fading out. I faded to black.
Don't worry, you're back.
So if you build AI systems that way, then they behave in ways that are very different from the traditional AI system. A traditional AI system is totally single-minded, right? If you ask it to fetch you a cup of coffee and, there's a wall in the way, it's going to break down the wall. If there are people in line for coffee, it's going to mow down all the people in Starbucks so it can get the coffee more quickly, right? So
I've seen that before.
That single-mindedness, I'm sure you know people like that. The single-mindedness is exactly the problem of why AGI is so dangerous. But this type of system, where it knows that it doesn't know what the objectives are, it will ask permission, it will behave cautiously, it will actually want to be switched off if you want to switch it off, if you want to prevent it from doing something. It knows that it doesn't want to do that, whatever it is, right? So this is a new kind of AI system. We really haven't built these types of AI systems. We've built the other kind for the last 80 years. So we have to create an entirely new theoretical foundation for AI, and then develop all the technology on that new foundation. So there's a lot of work to do. An important point to understand is it does not result in systems that are aligned with human values, in the sense that there's a point at which the AI system is able to perfectly predict which future people want, right? So it's always partial alignment,
right?
But it has to be aware that the alignment is not complete, and that's really important.
It feels rather nebulous.
Well, it might feel nebulous, but there are mathematical theorems behind all this. Yeah. And it draws on, there's a long tradition in philosophy and economics of understanding what it means for humans to have objectives, right? And utility theory is the name of that theory. And so we can build on that theory and develop actually mathematical theorems that say that this approach will give us the kinds of systems we want.
Let's have another question from the floor. There are many hands. There's a woman here in a yellow dress I love that color. Right in the middle, in the middle of the middle, I'm only giving you difficult people to reach. What's your name and where'd you come from and what's your question, please?
Thank you. My name is Bukola. I am a therapist and I'm really curious about your thoughts around AI and building emotional intimacy for therapeutic benefit.
I'm sorry, I didn't quite catch that.
Yeah, can you say the question again a bit louder?
There's a lot of background noise here. It's really hard to hear.
So I'm curious about emotional intimacy and AI.
Furious.
Yeah, curious.
Furious.
Yeah, about emotional intimacy and AI building emotional intimacy for therapeutic benefit.
Okay, great question. Yeah, so this is one area where I think there are good arguments on both sides. Generally, I think it should always be absolutely clear whether you're connecting to a machine or a human being. Because in fact there are all kinds of obligations that come from a connection with a human being that don't exist when you're connecting with a machine. I don't have to be polite to machines. I don't have to give machines the time of day just because they ask for it, and so on. So there are many differences there, and I think it's a fundamental right to know whether I'm interacting with a machine. But the therapeutic application, it does seem that in some cases people are more comfortable opening up to a machine than to a person on certain topics that they feel too reticent to discuss with a real person. So I think that's one case where one might allow, at least in a licensed therapeutic system that's been thoroughly tested and approved by the relevant authorities. The problem we have right now with these emotional connection bots or romantic connection bots, which have millions of clients, is that they're completely unregulated. And for example, recently, one of the vendors of these bots upgraded the software, and the software was no longer in love with the clients. And so the clients who had turned to the bots because of rejection by humans are now rejected by an algorithm. And this is really traumatic. And I'm sort of laughing, but actually, no, this is very sad. And
it's quite damaging, surely.
Yeah, there's serious consequences. And the companies are completely oblivious, right? They take no responsibility, as far as I can tell, for the damage that they do. And they don't feel that they should conform to any ethical standards or any medical standards. And I think this is, again, an area where governments have left the tech sector to do whatever it wants for too many decades, and they have to wake up and start fixing some of these problems.
That's a big question. Thank you for that one. Let's go to somebody. There's a chap Yes, that's the chap. What's your name and where'd you come from? And your question, please.
Stand up.
Hi, Stuart. My name's Will. I was born in Hong Kong, but I've been in London for several years now. You've talked a bit about the need for re-education in a world where AGI is doing everything for us better than we can in order to lead a happy and fulfilling life, and I was wondering if you could expand on that a bit.
Okay. Sorry, so you it's something about education.
Yeah, you've talked a bit about the need for re-education in a world where AGI is doing everything for us better than we can in order to lead a happy and fulfilling life, and I was wondering if you could expand on that a bit.
Okay.
Thank you.
So this is not a new question, and in fact, in the book Human Compatible, I quote.
Oh, I've heard of it.
That one, yeah, it's a good one. I quote Aristotle, and Aristotle actually wrote about what happens if we had intelligent machinery. Then we wouldn't need any workers anymore. So in 350 BC, he was already talking about technological unemployment.
Wow, it's not new then.
So it's not new. In 1930, Keynes, the famous Keynesian economist, also talked about this problem, and he said, eventually, machinery, science will meet all of our needs, which will lead to what is our real problem, which is how to live wisely and agreeably and well. And I think this is the crucial question, right? If we take away the incentive which necessity provides for us to learn how to run our civilization, right? And it's been absolutely necessary since pre-human times. In fact, human technologies, some of them have been passed on from generation to generation for 100,000 generations, even from pre-human species. So what happens when that chain breaks? Because we're passing it on to our machines instead of our offspring. I think this would be one of the saddest events ever. Also puts us at extreme risk of two kinds, right? One would be, if for some reason the machines fail to run our civilization properly, then it's too late for us to go back to school and learn how to do it and then fix everything. And secondly, actually knowing how to do things is just part of being a human being. And without that knowledge, it's very hard to have a worthwhile life. So we have to figure out a new incentive structure that will lead people to become educated and become capable without the economic incentives that we have used up until now. How we do that, I think, it's a problem for our culture. It's not a problem for AI people. We can't solve that problem. It's a problem for the poets, the filmmakers, to some extent the politicians, and for all of us to accord value and status to knowledge, capability, understanding, in order that we have that incentive to learn.
We've run out of time. I'm sure you've got lots of questions. I would love you to take it to social media and pose them there. Hashtag CogX Festival 2023. Potentially, Stuart may be available for a couple of questions at the back. Who knows? He's a busy guy. But one last thing. If you can leave the audience with one thought about AI and machine learning and the future of civilization, what is the one thing that our audience today should never, ever, ever forget?
That's a very good question. I don't think I have an answer ready. So I think the important thing is to distinguish between pessimism and common sense. To me, it's common sense to anticipate the ways a technology could fail catastrophically and to work to avoid those catastrophic failures. That is not pessimism, it's common sense. And I think the technical community in particular has to stop getting into this defensive crouch that they get into whenever you say, okay, here are some potential catastrophic failure modes. That is not anti-science, right? It's not anti-physics to say that nuclear power plants could explode if we don't build them carefully. That's just common sense. So don't turn it into an us versus them argument. Just figure out solutions to the problems, and maybe things will come out better that way.
That's brilliant, Stuart. Work the problem, use your common sense. Thank you to everybody who asked a question. Thank you for trying to ask a question. And most importantly, thank you, Stuart Russell, for your time and your wisdom. A round of applause. Thank you so much.